You can get Sons of Patriarchy completely ad-free on Apple Podcasts for $4.99 per month or $44.99 per year. This applies to our entire back catalog and every upcoming episode completely ad-free. Listening without interruption. If you don't mind the ads, you can still listen to the series for free on any of your favorite podcast platforms. This revenue helps support Outreach Idaho and helps pay the bills of the series. Now, on to the episode. Quick announcement before we start this episode. We've launched our website and initial line of merch. Go to sonsofpatriarchy.com and pick up a t-shirt, a sticker, or a crew neck fleece, or all three. And wait till you see our design. We went bold. A link to the website is in our show notes, or simply type sonsofpatriarchy.com into your search bar. Now, on with today's conversation. All right, welcome to Season 2 of Sons of Patriarchy. We have sort of dubbed Season 2 as the Evangelical Reckoning. Season 1 is a focus, although not exclusively so, but pretty much a focus on Doug Wilson and all the movements he has either spawned or been part of, or either improved or impressed himself on, or has innovated. And season 2 is, if we take all the things that are wrong from season 1, all the hurt, all the church craziness, all the political craziness, all the cultural craziness, season 1 is about where do those things come from and sort of where are they going to. And then season 2 is all about what do we do about it going forward? How do we respond to this well? How do we respond to it not reactionary wise, but how do we respond to it with both love and compassion, but also intellect? How do we engage with this stuff with our brain, with our heart, and in a way that is not just impressive, but that is full, that answers it fully. So we have a lot of people coming on this series who've either experienced this, who are experts in this, or a little bit of both as well. And so one of those that we have coming on this season, and it's another shout out. I had an interview yesterday that was a shout out. This one is again a shout out to a woman who's helped us out before, Abby and I. She connected me with a lot of people for season 2, so I give her a lot of props for this one. And she connected me with Christy Wood. And so if you can introduce yourself, a little bit about yourself, introduce yourself to the audience, and we'll get into Gothard more specifically, but how you found yourself in fundamentalism and occult churches and all this fun stuff.
Great, sounds great. Yeah, I'm Christy Lynne Wood, and I grew up in Gothard. But before we get there, what I am now is I've been married for 18 years. I have 2 teenage children. I work as a behavior specialist during the school year. I write. I've done podcasting. I like to be a guest on podcasts. And I'm pretty passionate about kind of the intersection between legalism and religion and mainstream kind of Christianity. So that's what I love to talk about and share about. How did I come to studying all things Gothard? I spent a decade in Gothard's cult. So from the time that I was 12 until I was about 22, my family was very involved in his homeschooling program. And so we joined it in 1993 as a 12-year-old, and I graduated from it and then would continue to go back and work at basic seminars, teaching children and stuff like that through the time I was about 22-ish. So yeah, lots of experience with all of that.
We are interrupting this episode to let you know that tickets for Sons of Patriarchy in Moscow go live on Eventbrite on August 4th and will be accessible wherever you find this podcast. All details of this event, what's happening, who is involved, where it's taking place, and what time it starts will also go live on August 4th. See you then. Correct me if I'm wrong, that's IBLP, all that stuff. That's you were actually in this and volunteering and working for it as well.
Yes. So Shiny Happy People on Amazon Prime went ahead and showed the world what this was like.
Yeah.
And before that, my story was, I feel like it was kind of relevant, but people didn't really know what I was talking about. And now all I have to do is say the Duggars and Shiny Happy People. And they're like, oh, yeah.
You know,
So yes, we were involved in it. Bill Gothard and IBLP had a homeschool program that you had to pay money to join, promise to never show the material to anybody, promise to only hang out with people that were like you in the program, promise to follow the rules and whatnot, and they would give you their curriculum that was supposed to be this amazing thing that was going to give you a college diploma, but really was full of craziness and misinformation.
yeah. I so I grew up, I'm 34. I grew up watching the Duggar family, 19
Yeah.
and counting, 18 and counting, and like all the spin-offs that they had. I and maybe this is just me being 12 or 13 and having no idea. And I didn't grow up in anything near Gothard. I didn't grow up in really fundamentalist Christianity. I grew up in mainline Christianity in Peace
Okay.
USA circles. And this was like about as far away from us as you could possibly get. We did not know. I was public school. I thought private school kids were weird, and not even getting into homeschool kids. I was public schooled all of my life, up until college. So I like Gothard wasn't even like a thought, and maybe you know this better. Maybe people are screaming as they're listening to this, like, yes, we heard his name, but was Gothard ever talked about in the Duggar family kind of little TV TLC series at all?
No, not very much at all. Like if you knew, you knew. So there were
Okay.
some video shots of them and they were using wisdom booklets. You could tell that. They looked ATI, so they very much looked like ATI families, the way they dressed originally with the giant collars on their shirts and the
Yep. I
matching
remember this.
jumpers and
Yep.
all of
Yep.
that kind of stuff. They mentioned things like going to Big Sandy or stuff like that, but they didn't come out
Okay.
and say they're part of Gothard. However, they were teaching at Gothard seminars and stuff like that. So he was still
Yeah.
doing some homeschooling seminars at the Big Sandy, Texas, and they would go and they would teach. There was a couple episodes I think where they had a sign on their van saying like whatever it's called, the training seminar or training center and
Right.
or bust or something like that. So it was there if you knew what to look for, and it wasn't there if you didn't.
I wonder if that was sort of intentional, where they're like, it's or if they just didn't think about it that much, because like I couldn't have caught it because I was not part of it, and I
Right.
was like, oh, this is just a humongous family for whatever reason that they have a humongous family. But I guess if you're in it, you're like, I see all the signs, and this is horrifying.
Oh, it made me so angry because I was just coming out. So they went like 2003, 2004, something like that when they first kind of came on TV, I think, something like that, maybe
Yeah, I
20,
remember this. Yep.
2002. But I was literally just coming out. Like my eyes were opened, I knew what was going on. And then suddenly here's this whole family on TV trying to pretend like they had all the
Hmm.
answers and I was like, "No, I know who you are.
Yeah.
I know what's going on behind the scenes. Like I know why your kids act like the way they do. I know why you dress the way you do." Like, and it was so frustrating to me just to see everyone be like, "Oh, I love them. They're amazing." And I was like,
Hmm.
"No, no, they're not." And so when everything came out later on about like Josh Duggar and stuff like
You're
that,
like,
I
well, of
was not
course.
not surprised at all.
Yeah. Yeah. Disgusting, but not surprised.
Yeah, because
Um,
I knew what kind of stuff went on behind the curtain.
Yeah, I mean, even like from my perspective, and I'm assuming other Christians like me, and probably also non-Christians too. You're like, it's weird, but it wasn't like nothing. You couldn't pick out anything that's like, well, this is obviously cultic. You're just like,
Right.
they just have a humongous family, which is really odd, but they seem nice. They seem kind of stable. Their children seem obedient, which when you saw kind of the surface sheeny glossy level,
Yes.
you're like, that's nice for them, but like not for me. But you didn't see the underbelly of like nobody had any categories for like what's going on here.
Exactly. Except for those of us who had lived it.
Yeah, and you're like, we know exactly what's going on, and just
Yeah.
wait till the world finds out. And then
Basically,
eventually,
yeah.
the world did find out. Yep. So we talk about
Yeah.
the Duggars. Let's talk about Christy. What was it like growing up, not just tangential to the Gothard
Yeah.
movement, but like you were in this, you
I
were
was in it.
homeschooled in this, you helped
Yep.
it, you worked it. But paint a picture of living this Gothard lifestyle.
Yeah. I think one of the best ways to explain it is one of the assignments in one of the wisdom booklets, one of the very first wisdom booklets. You're supposed to go to a parking lot at a grocery store and sit there with your family and people watch. And as the people walk by, try to assume what's wrong with them.
Oh my gosh.
Like, what kind of root problem does this person have based on the way they're dressed? What kind of a
So
root
judge a book
problem does
by
this
its
person?
cover.
Yes, judge a book by the cover. Go into the world and judge them. I think that's probably one of the biggest ways to explain what it was like growing up like that. We were different. We were set apart. We were the holy ones. We were the ones that had the answers. Gothard always talked about his secrets and his hidden wisdom and his special understanding that God had given him. And so you truly believed that we had these magical formulas that could make the world this perfect place if you just followed the steps that Gothard gave you. And so my story is interesting because my dad was actually a public school teacher the whole time we were in this
Really?
cult. Yeah. So
Good job,
we
Dad.
were,
Yeah.
yeah, I know, right? We were a fringe family. And so we didn't buy in. I mean, there were some Gothard worshipers that I met, but we didn't buy into everything. My parents were kind of skeptical about a lot. They didn't really let us go to the training centers and get involved in stuff. But at the same time, they took us to a Gothard adjacent church. So everybody at this church was using the Gothard program or trying to get into the Gothard program. Gothard at one point in time called our church the model church. He was very connected with the pastor's son, who was kind of a youth pastor for us. And we went there twice a week for 5 years. And I would say that's where most of my brainwashing happened. Like, my parents were trying to pick out things at home and just teach us the good stuff, quote unquote.
Mhm.
And then they took us to this church where at every youth event and every winter retreat and every anything, I was getting brainwashed and told, follow these rules or God won't be happy with you. Follow these rules, look like this, have these standards, be godly. This is what a woman looks like. This is what a girl looks like. This is what a boy looks like. Very strict gender roles, tons of formulas, tons of rules. Think Baptist and then raise it up a notch. So yeah, we didn't dance or drink or play cards. We also didn't date. We were committed to courtship.
Yep.
We didn't watch any kind of movie over the G rating. We didn't listen to any music with drums in it because drums were evil from the devil.
Yep.
So just a lot of standards and a lot of rules and a lot of paranoia, I would say, about outsiders, a lot of isolation, trying to be just like the other ATI people and follow along. And for me, I was a people pleaser and I just wanted to be a godly person that people liked. So I jumped right in and curled my hair and wore the dresses and wore the culottes and tried hard to be a godly girl.
Yeah. And you can't fault yourself for that too, because when you're ages 12 to 17, you're looking for a tribe, you're looking for friends, you're looking for validation, you're looking for approval.
Yep.
And if that's what everybody else is doing, it's
That's
not
what you
even
do.
like, you don't think about the reasons, like, why am I doing this? Like, well, if everybody else is doing this, I need friends, therefore I need to do this too. If I don't do this, I will have no more friends.
Yeah, well, then you're a rebel. There was two kinds of kids in our church. There was the godly kids who followed the rules, and there were the ones we called the rebels, who were pushing back against this stuff. And I didn't want to be a rebel. I wanted to be a godly kid.
Yeah. Yeah, because if you're a rebel, you're labeled, and then
And you're ostracized.
Yeah. And then you're not out yet, but you're being inched out unless you come back into the
Exactly.
the godly
Conform.
group. Yep. I'm curious too, and I don't know much about Gothard theology other than his cultural and gender role kind of stuff, and maybe not that this isn't the right question to ask, but since we have so focused and dove in deeply into all things Wilson and his theology, because a lot of his theology is sounds like a dumb question. Is Gothard Reformed? Does he have a label or a few labels, like this is kind of the theological system that he follows, or is it there wasn't much there other than these are the things you got to do?
Basically, there wasn't much there except for these are my mystical 7 principles that you have to follow.
Okay.
I think he kind of blended in with a lot of different evangelical denominations. I think he was considered just a conservative evangelical. And so
Gotcha.
he would have blended into some Reformed churches. He would have blended into Baptist churches,
Hmm.
independent fundamental Baptist churches. He would have blended into some Presbyterian churches, like whatever. Like he didn't have a ton of strict theology. I don't think he ever really talked about salvation. I
Which
don't
is
think he
probably
ever
helpful
talked.
if you want to like be really influential, is to not really
Yes,
stand for all that, like not to have anything sturdy. To where
yes.
if you go to one
It was,
denomination, they can sign on to you. If you go to another denomination, they can sign on
yes.
to you as well.
Yeah, it was more just like these principles, these universal basic principles that would apply to anyone, everywhere, and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it would flow in and slide into wherever you wanted it to slide into.
That, I guess it makes sense. If he were as and I'd still call Doug Wilson slimy theologically, where
Oh,
he'll
absolutely.
slither. But with Gothard, it didn't like it wasn't slimy theologically. Like there wasn't much depth theologically, other than like you said, the seven principles. But you can, if he had too much, then he couldn't fit into the Presbyterians, or he couldn't fit into
Right.
the Baptists, he couldn't fit into the Pentecostals, he couldn't fit into the Fundamentalists. He had to be generic enough to where all the
Yes.
people says, like, yeah, we'll take in this
Yeah,
because we sign on to those seven principles that you
exactly.
uphold.
And he was so generic. Like if you read the website even now for IBLP, you're literally like, these are words, but what are they saying? I mean, who calls their seminar the basic seminar? That is the
Yeah.
dumbest name I've ever heard. And the
Yep.
second seminar, he called it the advanced seminar. Ooh, wow, you're really creative. Like it
Hmm.
was just that kind of just generic, basic,
Yeah.
bland. But I think that's almost why it was so dangerous.
Yeah.
It's like nothing stood out to be like, ooh, this is weird. No, it was just this
True.
bland basicness that just snuck in, but everything was twisted. Like all of his definitions were twisted. His definition of grace was twisted. His definition of faith was twisted. Like he'd use these words and you'd think you knew what he was talking about. And then you would hear the definitions and go, wait a minute.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
So, yeah,
So
sneaky.
you said you did not want to be a rebel. You wanted to be a godly girl. And then later on, not too long ago, you wrote a book called Religious Rebels, where
Yes.
now you take on the label religious rebel, describing how you got into this, what it was like, how you got out, and then what following Jesus looks like when you're not in a high control environment that gives you, quote unquote, all the answers. So, can you give us a glimpse into this book and why you wrote it and
Yeah,
who it's for and
sure.
some things people can look for in it?
Yeah. So I wrote Religious Rebels because when I got out of Gothard's cult and got into mainstream Christianity, and with, in the next 10 years, as I was kind of trying to figure out how to live real life and be normal, which was a journey and a challenge. Fortunately, I married my wonderfully opposite husband, so he helped me a lot.
Hmm.
But as I got into the evangelical church, I started seeing things and I was like, gosh, that's familiar. Gosh, that seems so familiar. That's so familiar. That's twisted. That lie. It's right there. And then as everything fell apart with Gothard about 13-ish years ago and he got exposed for his sexual harassment and all this other stuff that was happening, um, I was like, oh my word, I was in a cult. And so that's about the time that I started really my eyes opened and thinking about it and really just rethinking a lot of my theology and a lot of the things that I believed and a lot of the way I view God and view myself and performance and all of that stuff. I saw the same kind of things happening within mainstream evangelical churches, where the same people are also trying to struggle with their faith in the same way. Like, what is this? Why are there all these rules? Why is there all this religion? Why are these formulas? Because I feel like Gothard was kind of like an extreme version of what was already happening in the evangelical system. And so that's just kind of like it was already heading this way or doing these things. And then Gothard was just a little more extreme. So as I found out that I was in a cult connected with a lot of other former students and stuff like that online, just a lot of them had left the faith. And I was just like, why have I not left the faith? Like, why do
Hmm.
I still believe in Jesus? And it really came down to the fact that when I was 15, I'd had an encounter with the Holy Spirit that I can't explain, that I wasn't looking for. He just showed up and made himself really real to me. And I was like, okay, if he's real, I want to get to know him. And so over the next 4 years, I started reading the Bible for myself. I was praying for myself and I was trying to connect to this God that I had discovered was real, real. And as I got to know him for myself, he didn't line up with the God that Gothard talked about. He didn't line up with the God the church talked about. And I was like, okay, one of these is pretend. And I'm pretty sure it's not the one I know really well.
Mhm.
And so that's what started my rebellion. And that's kind of the joke in the book, is that it wasn't blue jeans, it wasn't rock music, it wasn't all these things that they said were going to make me rebel. It was Jesus.
It was getting to know the God of the Bible. Yeah.
Yes, getting to know the real God of the Bible was like, I was like, no, you guys are all a bunch of like crazy people who believe crazy things, and this isn't true. And so the premise of Religious Rebels is just to be willing to question those things and those experiences you've had and those religious things that you've had, and say, hey, maybe this isn't really Jesus. Maybe this isn't really the God, the real God. Maybe it's just this religious small g God that I've experienced. And so it's almost like a permission to deconstruct, but then reconstruct a faith around Jesus. Because as I got into the deconstruction community, there was a lot of people that just were like, okay, you're going to deconstruct and then you're going to not be a Christian anymore. Or you're going to deconstruct and you're going to become this progressive atheist. Or, just there was all these like ideas of what they had your end goal to be. And I was like, well, I've deconstructed, but I've still followed Jesus. And I wanted there to be an option for people. So like I wrote the book as an option. Like you can deconstruct and you can ask all these questions, and God is not mad at you and he does not care. He is happy to have your questions. And then if you want to, you can rebuild a faith around Jesus, who might not be what you thought he was.
Mm-hmm. I like that. Yeah, that's and I hesitate using the word deconstruction, not because I myself haven't deconstructed. It's because I think, like you said, that there's it's one of those lightning rods that people assume you mean something by it that you may or may not mean by it, which I would still consider myself reformed in a lot of ways, but not reformed in the way that I think what people think reformed is, nor that those who are reformed think reformed means as well. And like you said, the God of the Bible, I look at the confessions and catechisms of the Reformed Church and say, like, these don't say the things that a lot of Reformed people think that they say or assume that they say, which sounds similar to what you're saying about your book and about your journey too. It's what the Bible is saying is not what Gothard's saying, nor is what Jesus and the Bible are saying something different than what I'm hearing from the stage or what I'm hearing from these homeschool materials, whatever it may be.
Yep, absolutely.
Gotcha. So we have a sort of a new Gothard out there, or I'll say we have multiple Gothards out there, but we have a guy who's modeled himself in some ways after Gothard in the Reformed world, and he's trying to make inroads. And he has inroads in classical education. He has inroads in like Christian media with Canon Plus and Canon everything else. If people are following this series, they know exactly who it is. So when you look at somebody like Doug Wilson, you could even say a Piper or somebody else in this realm too that we've profiled. What do you see in Wilson today that's both similar to what you grew up in with Gothard, but different from Gothard? It's like, yes, you're the same, but there's something a little bit different about you. So what do you see similar and different? And it may be like time and place in the 90s and 2000s versus today with social media and everything else. But yeah, what do you see between these two leaders?
I mean, I see a lot of similarities. As I was writing down some notes just for this podcast, just to kind of, I was like, wow, there's a lot. I think that the isolation is one of the things that first hit me. Like he's kind of the same isolationist.
Yep.
Idea of, we're right and everyone else is wrong, and we want to convert everyone else to our side because we're the only ones that have the real truth. Encouraging people to, stay with people who are like them or to convert people to become like them. The dominionist ideology there, where we're like taking over the world, that is very familiar to me and scary. Gothard ended up with training centers in New Zealand, Taiwan, Russia, Romania, and 4 or 5 here in the US. And his goal was to like have them everywhere. But Wilson takes over towns, which to me is kind of more frightening because I would say that's a little more practical and applicable if you're actually taking over a town versus just sticking a training center somewhere.
Yeah, and also like churches within those towns and then town too. Because with training centers, it's distance enough to where they go to a training center that's not attached to a church or is not attached
Yes.
to kind of civic stuff. But
Right.
then Wilson zeroes in on the civic centers, on the churches, places that
Yes.
have influence in these
Yes.
areas.
Yeah, and that dominionist idea of like we're going to take over and dominate is familiar, but I would say in Wilson's case probably more scary. Like I feel like he actually has steps and is making things happen versus Gothard, who was like had these woo-woo ideas up here that he was, yeah. I think Gothard more cared about having lots of people think he was awesome and getting girls to come to his headquarters so that he could, play footsie
Around
with
with
them
them.
and touch their hair.
Yep.
So, but then I think the other thing that really hits me is just his ideas about family and gender hierarchy and gender roles and male leadership and women's submission. And I would say he's probably more extreme than Gothard was in that kind of scenarios. Like I've seen some stuff that he's said and people who have been involved in some of his churches. Like I don't think Gothard ever encouraged wife spanking and stuff like that. Like that was not something that Gothard encouraged. And so I would say Wilson is probably even more extreme with his hierarchy. But Gothard had the umbrella system, which you've seen. That, here's God, here's the husband, here's the wife, here's the kids.
It's ugly, ugly head again in contemporary
and
church
I don't think it really
culture.
ever went away because I don't think anybody ever was bold enough to say, hey, that's wrong and here's why. I mean, I don't know. It just keeps circling.
It does.
So I would say that's very similar. I think that just his expectations for women and his dismissal of women, even to the point where like many of his followers and maybe even himself thinks women shouldn't get a vote. Women shouldn't be seen in the public sphere. That's, like I said, similar, but a step more extreme. I don't think anybody in my church or in my culture growing up was saying women shouldn't vote. It was women shouldn't go to college, women should get married early, women should have lots of kids, women should stay home, women should homeschool.
It's kind of like a stepping board there, not there yet.
Yeah, no, it wasn't there yet. And I'm not sure it was ever going to be there. Like that's a whole different level of women's suppression to me than Gothard had. But it's similar, but different. And the weird part to me, I guess, is like Gothard was big into don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. But in the Reformed circle, like they're smoking and they're drinking and stuff like that, which is totally fine. But yet they're also saying that it's okay to own slaves and women shouldn't vote.
Yeah, there's liberty in some aspects and then zero liberty in others, and in fact slavery in others.
Yeah, and so it's weird to me to see things that I'm like, whoa, that's really similar, and then be like, oh, actually, it's scarier.
Yeah, well, which is interesting you bring that up. That what you just brought up, I couldn't give an exact percentage. I'll put it at about a quarter of those that we've profiled, the survivor stories on this series. Something like a quarter, it might be a little bit higher, it might be a little bit lower, came from Gothard circles to Wilson circles because like you said, it was similar enough to where it's the parents like, okay, we want obedient children, we want a homeschool, we want a private school. This gives us kind of the curriculum for that. It gives us the avenue and the standards and the rules for that. The church is similar enough to where it's like they still have a high reverence for some of these things. But there's liberty where we can drink at this church. We can smoke at this church. We can dance at this church. Like they had the dance, like they have the actual dances at the church. So it's interesting that there did seem to be, and there does seem to be a pipeline from extraordinarily high control, high rule, no alcohol, no movies, no nothing, to same lane, harsher on some aspects, but freer on some other aspects of people who come from Gothard to Wilson circles.
When was Wilson rising? Like when did he first start rising in popularity?
When he rose media wise would have been the late 2010s.
Because that's about the time that Gothard was like disappearing.
Okay. Yeah.
So Gothard was super popular. Huge. Like 70s and 80s was Gothard, like this is seminars. 80s to 90s and early 2000s would have been Gothard's homeschool program. Yep. And then his homeschool program starts to kind of fade off a little bit in the early 2000s. So that makes sense that they would have jumped ship at that point in time over to Doug Wilson.
Yeah.
It lines up.
It also lines up because Wilson's homeschool and classical school curriculum launches in the late 80s,
Okay.
gets popular in the mid 90s.
Yep, that lines up
Um,
perfectly.
yeah, because Crossway picks it up, and then he establishes Canon publisher late 90s, early 2000s. So it does seem like when Gothard's homeschool stuff started popping, that like it provided some of the fodder also as well for
Yeah.
Wilson. And when Gothard, which is interesting too, so Wilson goes from not very popular media to extraordinarily popular now in his 70s, when it seems like Gothard went the opposite. He was very popular and then started spittering out popularity wise, obviously with the sex abuse and assault allegations too, and coming under that.
Yeah, that would have been, I'm trying to think of like, that was like 2012,
Yeah,
maybe, when that started
early
really
mid
happening.
2010s. Yep.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, it's
but he was
interesting to
already
talk
kind of
over.
fading at that point. I mean, when I was teaching the children's institutes in 2000, 2001, they weren't at arenas anymore. They were at large churches.
Okay.
So it was already starting to fade.
Yeah.
And I
So
think
that
part of it just didn't work.
yeah.
Like it didn't work. And some people
Yeah.
were just like, well, we already done that before.
Yeah, if those started in the 70s and 80s, by the time, yeah, in the 2000s, when they're at smaller venues, those who had grown up, who had gone to the seminars in 70s and 80s, are now the parents of the kids who would have gone to the seminars. And they're looking at their life as like, why on earth did I go to this? This didn't do anything for me. And they wouldn't send. My assumption is Gothard relied very heavily on the same family sending generations of kids to this one after the other. But then when it doesn't work for one generation, they're not going to tell the next generation, like, yeah, let's go over to these seminars
Yeah. And it just
later
got
on.
smaller and smaller and smaller. Like it just, and, even when it was meeting in Big Sandy, Texas, it was like half the size it used to be.
Yep. Yep.
So, yeah.
So those are similarities and differences. Now I want to think not broader in the sense, not talking about this, but for those who maybe like you or me grew up in the 80s or 90s, who are now thinking through some of these things, questioning childhood stuff, questioning teenage stuff, questioning education, questioning a lot of religious practices, but they didn't grow up going to basic life principles. They didn't grow up under Gothard's specific homeschool curriculum. And so they're wondering, like, well, is his influence kind of really in some of this stuff, even if they went to a hyper conservative church? If you can, like, some basic themes that they can look back and say, okay, that was there. Even though I didn't go or I didn't utilize his homeschool curriculum, I didn't go to an IBLP seminar, I didn't go to a basic life or advanced life thing. I never heard his name growing up, but then they start seeing themes and trajectories and say, actually, you know what? I actually was influenced by this, or my parents were influenced by this, whether we knew it or not. So what are some of those themes that people who didn't grow up specifically in the system, but influenced by this system?
Yeah. No, that's a really good question. It's estimated that 2.5 million people have attended his basic seminar.
Holy crap. Okay. That's a lot. Yeah.
So in the 70s and 80s, I mean, people went. My parents went as college kids. Their campus minister took them as college kids. And so what you just said about people being influenced without even realizing it, yes. The answer is yes. There are probably millions of people who went one time and walked away and didn't go again, but also didn't ever get rid of the ideas and took them with them. And so I would say things to look out for, a heavy emphasis on authority. So like authority is from God and we don't question the authorities and we just follow the authorities and we obey the authorities. And that's huge in Gothard land. His heavy emphasis on Matthew 18 for
Mhm.
any kind of conflict, but he went even farther and did this whole thing about not listening to an evil report. An evil report could be damaging to you,
Mhm.
and so you shouldn't listen to any kind of an evil report. So that I see these churches where it's really a big focus on don't gossip, don't gossip. And really, what it means is don't tell the truth about what's actually
Yeah,
going on.
exactly. Yeah.
And that makes me wonder about that. I'm like, interesting. So I see a lot of it with authority. I see a lot of it with his idea of yielding rights. He called it ownership, but basically it was like you didn't have ownership over anything. So you were always supposed to yield your rights and just be a lump and let everyone walk all over you.
Hmm.
That's very interesting to me because I see that throughout various places and churches and mainstream places. The
Mhm.
idea of, I'm just going to roll over and just let this happen because it must be from God. And I'm not going to stand up and say, hey, I don't like how that
Yeah.
feels.
Or they would like slightly change the wording. I've heard this where you're suffering like Christ suffered. And
Yeah.
so the suffering is going to mold you and shape you
Well,
into a
that's
better
suffering. That's
servant for
another
his
basic
purpose.
principle.
Okay, there you go.
That's suffering. Yep. I would say that I think one of the things that I think he stole it from somebody else, honestly. But his bitterness diagram. So if people have ever seen this bitterness diagram, think of a chessboard, and someone draws a little castle on there, and tells you that you probably have this root of bitterness somewhere in your soul, and that now Satan has a place in your soul, and he can shoot these arrows, and they tell you what the next step is. Now you're angry, and you're having all these surface problems and stuff like that, and that has got around. Like that's gotten around places. And this idea of like we have these root causes that are deep within us. Usually it was bitterness, greed, and moral impurity, which is Sid's fancy way of saying sexual sin.
Mhm.
Um, but like that idea of the root problems, the root problems of bitterness, greed, and moral impurity. I find that ironic. Those were his three root problems because that's what he struggled with.
Yeah, it happens. Things that you harp
no.
on most happen to be. I mean, they usually are the things that you struggle with the most yourself.
And so the idea of root, and then surface problems, I think, is something that is definitely a Gothard thing that he just kind of co-opted and took. So yeah, I would say that the authority thing, the ownership thing, the suffering thing, the idea of these root causes in our lives, it's just there. And I'm amazed at how many people's parents still own the character sketches. So they were these big, beautiful books with gorgeous pictures, and they had Bible stories and nature stories in them.
Hmm.
And they're called character sketches, and they're all about character qualities. But they're twisted.
Hmm.
Every Bible story has been twisted.
Hmm.
So they're out there though. I've seen in people's houses. I'm like, oh, look at that, character sketches. Woohoo.
Yeah, it's like you got trouble in your life, and you should probably work on that. That's I'm more and more thankful, like I said at the beginning of this, that I grew up mainline.
Yeah.
Like this is about like I couldn't tell you where any of this stuff came from because we were progressive Christians, quote unquote.
Mhm.
To it's like you wouldn't have caught us dead with Gothard. I mean, I'm assuming this. I don't know it for sure, but it's a lot of this stuff I'm now learning, and
Yeah.
it was such to somebody outside. It's like this is just so strange. Why would anybody? It was like homeschooling. It's like why would you homeschool when you have a
Yeah.
perfectly good free quote unquote? I don't know your taxes are paying for it, but a public school that has actual legitimate teachers and a legitimate
Yeah.
curriculum and everything else. It's so interesting hearing this from an outside perspective. But those who are in it, I'm assuming is like you are speaking my language, and we have been through the same things before. So
Yeah, it is.
very,
But that's kind of how it was. Even then, is you had a language you could speak, and you could
yeah,
tell if someone else was also in ATI because they understood your language.
true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Versus us public school kids, like you're just weird. It's I don't know
And
what you're.
obviously, well, yeah, and we're looking at you like you're worldly. We got to stay far away from you. You're going to
Yeah,
contaminate us.
exactly. Yeah. So one of my last questions, and we've talked about this at length, but I always like hearing either different perspectives, different explanations, or from different backgrounds. Answers to this question too. If these are so high controlling, if these are so traumatic, if these lead to such horrific outcomes for kids, for parents, for families, brokenness of faith, brokenness of bodies, brokenness of minds, like psychological craziness. What on earth makes it so enticing? If it's so rule driven, if it's so, I mean, you look 20, 30 years down the road, it's like nobody flourished after this.
Oh, yeah.
Why do people keep coming?
Yeah. No, it's the age-old question, right? Nobody joins a cult. Nobody sets out to join a cult and says, I'm going to join a cult.
Hmm.
No one does that. We join communities.
Yep.
We join places where we feel safe. We join people who tell us they have answers. And so I think a lot of it with Gothard, and I'm sure with Wilson, comes down to people who are afraid. We look at the world around us and it looks scary and out of control and chaotic. We're worried about our families. We're worried about our kids. We're worried about our marriages. And here comes some charismatic leader who says, come, I have all the answers.
Hmm.
Like I have formulas, I have steps, I have things you can follow and things you can do, and I will promise you success. If you follow my things, you will have success and blessings. Your kids will turn out. Your marriage will be good. You will have wealth. You will have all these things, whatever Wilson's promising, you know. I don't know what his promise
Yeah, so
specifically is, but
he does probably, yeah, wealth and family, generational
yeah.
blessings,
Okay, there you
and
go. So
everything.
same kind of stuff. It's the same charlatan approach where they're saying, I have these answers for you. All you have to do is X, Y, Z, and this is your guaranteed outcome. And if you have somebody who's afraid and somebody who does not have a community and somebody who does not have a good background in scripture and understanding of the Bible, and somebody who is looking desperately for something, that's really appealing. And nobody in these cult groups like this start out with, oh, by the way, you have to sell your soul to be here. You know, they give you the good stuff. They're like, hey, this is all the good stuff. Join, come. And so people do. People are drawn in because they want that security. They want that promise of success. They want that sense of purpose, of community, of like-mindedness, of people they're going to do this journey with. And they get drawn in. Like I said, people who can't critically think and people who don't have that background to say, whoa. And I'm actually writing my Substack this weekend about just these false ideas we have about things like, well, we can't trust our own heart because our heart is deceitfully wicked. You hear that verse.
Mm-hmm.
And so people who should be feeling red flags and should be feeling the sense of like, whoa, this is weird. They don't, because they've turned that part of themselves off trying to say, well, I can't trust my heart. I got to trust God. And so here you go. And now you're drawn into this high control religion.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've asked, not the opposite of this question, I've asked the flip side of this question before, to those who've deconstructed out of the faith. But now I want to ask you, this is not an initial set of questions, but I think you can answer this one pretty well. Before my last, not real question, but just anything last from you. Can you talk to conservative Christians about deconstruction, and not deconstruction from the faith, but deconstruction still in the faith? Believing in Jesus and whatever that may look like for you, but because I've heard it. I mean, it's hard not to think deconstruction and think immediately bad, and you're apostatizing from the faith, that you're leaving everything, that you are no longer looking at scripture as God's word, or no longer looking at Jesus, no longer caring about the Christian faith. When you talk about deconstruction and if you can talk to a conservative about deconstruction, what does that look like? And not the scary deconstruction to quote unquote progressivism or whatever it may be. Although
it's actually one of my favorite things to talk about, actually. So I'm glad you asked me that question.
Yeah. So let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's talk about it. I am passionate about reclaiming the word deconstruction because in any other context besides faith, it just means to take something apart to its individual pieces.
Mm-hmm.
If you have deconstructed food, deconstructed beverages, deconstructed clothes, deconstructed buildings, you're just taking that thing apart to its individual pieces. It never says what you do with it. But somehow within the deconstruction community, people decided their new definition that deconstruction meant deconverting. But deconstruction does not mean deconverting. Mm-hmm. You could deconvert once you finish deconstruction if you want to.
Yep.
But you don't have to deconvert if you deconstruct. You're just taking those faith pieces apart and you're giving them a critical look and you're going, what's actually real and what's actually not real? And what am I going to do with these pieces that I have here? And so I'm actually really passionate about still using that word. There's a lot of people who try to push back and tell me not to use it, but I want to use it because I want people to find me and realize, oh, wait, I can deconstruct and still follow Jesus? That's possible? Like, yes, I want you to have that option. And I want to be in a place that gives you that option. Because I would say I've been through probably 4 major seasons of deconstruction in my life before that was even a buzzword. So it wasn't a buzzword, we didn't use it, but I tore apart my faith and put it back together again 4 times in my life. And each time I have put it back together based on the person of Jesus Christ. Has my understanding of theology and the Bible changed? Yeah, it has. But my belief in and love of Jesus has not changed. Has he gotten bigger and crazier and more amazing? As I've let him out of my box that I used to have him in. And has my understanding of scripture changed? Yeah, it has. But I still value scripture. I still love scripture. I still consider myself to be a global evangelical. just meaning like I love the Bible and I believe in a personal relationship with Jesus and I want to tell you about it.
Hmm.
Like, am I politically evangelical? Absolutely not.
Yeah,
But
same
am I
here.
a
Neither am I.
global evangelical? Yes.
Yeah.
And so I think that I just want to push back and tell people who have heard that deconstruction means deconversion, that it doesn't. And actually, there's a book by Scott McKnight and
Mhm.
Tommy. Oh man, what's Tommy's last name? I lost it for a minute. Sorry, Tommy. Called The Invisible Jesus.
Yep. We actually had Scott
Yep,
McKnight on for that book and many others
perfect.
in season 2.
And they are showing that with surveys, most people who deconstruct don't actually leave the faith.
Huh.
They just change denominations or they change their ideas about things, but they still hold on to some kind of Christian belief,
Hmm.
which I found very interesting because that's not the kind of picture you
That's
get.
not the narrative you get. Not at all.
No. So I think we're listening to the wrong narrative, which I mean, shocking. Look at that. Well, you do that all the
Yeah.
time anyway.
Well, who are we listening to the narrative from? It tends to be, like you said, the politically evangelical group. It says you can't deconstruct because if you deconstruct, they won't say the word, but you'll deconvert, you'll apostatize.
Right. And that's not the case. Studies show that that's not the case, and that hasn't been the case in my life. And the vast majority of people that I've connected with on Threads and Substack, that has not been their like experience
That's
either.
true.
Like they still hold on to their faith. It just looks different.
That is true. Yeah.
So it makes me wonder what the fear is then with
Yeah.
those conservative evangelicals. Like what are you afraid of?
Yeah. And this goes to what you said. And I forget who I talked about this before. I think the fear is deconstructing, taking into its constituent parts. There's a fear. It's like you can't do that necessarily because it is a system. If you pull one little thread, you can't just like look at all the parts and say I want this, I want that. The assumption is if you pull one thread, if you pull complementarianism, or if you pull old Earth versus young Earth, like then necessarily the whole thing just crumbles. It's like that. It's the snowball fallacy. If you have a little thing, it'll just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger the farther you go down. So I think there's that fear. It's like one little thing is not like could possibly lead to, but necessarily leads to a bigger deconversion later down the road.
Which isn't necessarily true.
No, it's not necessarily true.
It might lead simply to a more nuanced faith where you have places for complexity and mystery and paradox, and you're just okay with not having all the answers.
Yeah, which to be honest it's just truer of life, the complexity and nuance. Like I guess there could be some case for some black and white here and there, but you also don't live life. I talked to a woman named Michelle Moffat on certainty versus uncertainty, and you just like I think cerebrally and like in our brains we'll think that things are black and white, but nobody lives life black and white. It's not a livable thing.
No.
Where like I would say like living without Jesus is not as livable as it is living with Jesus. But it's nobody lives their life black and white. You can't live your life black and white. It's impossible.
Life is too complex. And so I think for me, I feel like I've finally gotten to the place with my deconstruction and reconstruction of faith where I feel very certain about a few theological points.
Yep. Same here.
Very certain. Like you probably can't make me change my mind.
Same here.
About a very few.
Yep. I'm one of those people like Apostles' Creed for me, and this is not everybody. I understand that, but Apostles' Creed for me, it's like that's the stuff that like I can stamp my name on. If it's outside of that, it's like I don't know. Could be.
I might have opinions on things outside of that, but I'm also like I'm okay with being wrong, and I'm okay with learning and maybe changing my mind. But like I have a few things that I'm like, no, this is what I believe.
Yep.
And then other things I'm like, yeah, I don't know. It's okay. I don't have to know the answer to all that. And I think being able to get to that place is actually the goal. So with deconstruction, a lot of times people just flip sides. So they start conservative and they just flip to liberal. And now they're just as black and white and just as fundamental about a new set of beliefs. That's not really deconstruction because you haven't actually taken apart.
All the time. I was like, I don't think you know my politics nor my theological outlook all that well.
Yeah, we haven't deconstructed deep enough. We're just flipping sides. And we think we've changed. Well, no, you really haven't changed. You still have that same heart. It's just desiring certainty.
Reactionary.
So like, dig in a little more. Take it more apart. The next layer.
Yeah, Totally. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a very helpful, not just answer, but explanation of some of this too. So, last question is not a question. This is I wanna leave the guest with the last word for the episodes. What of all that we talked about, if you want to pull another thread from what we talked about, if you want to bring something else up new that's particularly on your heart or mind, what would Christy Lynne Wood like to leave listeners with from this episode?
I think maybe just the understanding that we are all susceptible to this high control religion. Like we're all susceptible to this idea of certainty and like we want it. And so I think that as we approach other people, especially as people who are free from high control religion, as we approach people who are still stuck in it and are still stuck into a set of beliefs or the certainty of whatever it is that they believe, like just to approach them with grace and love, because that's what made me understand the truth. Like when I came as a rigid 21-year-old to the West Michigan and was a camp counselor for the first summer in my long skirts and my long hair and my had never watched a PG movie before. And I mean, just like all these things, never flirted with boys before, never all this stuff. And I was like the only weird one in this whole camp of really awesome, normal, worldly Christians. And they just loved me. Like nobody told me I was wrong. Nobody corrected me. Nobody judged me. They just let me be weird and loved me and also offered me opportunities to experience real life. And it was just completely life-changing. I left that year having had so many new experiences and having my own mindset just challenged. And I got a cartilage piercing to prove that I was like free and and
Yeah.
all this stuff. And it was so I would just say, like, I know that world can be kind of crazy right now and people are very polarized and very stuck and sure that they're right, but just approach people with grace and love them because that's what's going to help them to change their minds.